The first time I realized my sister had taken control of Dad's company, I was standing outside his office watching her change the locks. She didn't tell me she was doing it. She didn't ask me. She didn't even look embarrassed. She simply handed a locksmith a key and said, "Use this one for the front door too." I stared at her. "Sarah, what are you doing?" She turned around. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "Taking care of Dad's business. Dad died 4 days ago." "I know. And you're changing the locks?" "Yes. Why?" She looked at me like the answer was obvious. "Because someone has to be in charge." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Who put you in charge?" She smiled. "Dad did." That sentence stopped me, because Dad had always told me something different. He used to say, "If anything ever happens to me, don't let Sarah turn the company into a battlefield." I thought it was just another one of his jokes. I didn't know he had a reason for saying it. I didn't know Sarah had already been preparing to take control. And I definitely didn't know that 3 days later, one of Dad's oldest employees would quietly hand me a thick brown file. There was one sentence written across the front: "Do not open until sea leaves." The employee looked over his shoulder before giving it to me. Then he whispered, "Your father told me to give you this if she ever tried to take the company." My name is Emily. I'm 39 years old. My sister Sarah is 42. Our father Michael owned a construction company called Reed & Sons Construction. The name had never made much sense because there were no sons. There was Dad. There were several employees. And there was Sarah, who had started working there when she was 23. I had never worked for the company. I chose a completely different career. I became a teacher. Dad never complained about that. Sarah sometimes did. She would say things like, "You should have joined the company." Or, "You don't understand what Dad built." Or, "You have no idea how much work goes into keeping it running." She wasn't wrong. I didn't understand the construction business. I didn't know how to read a commercial contract. I couldn't tell the difference between half the machines in Dad's workshop. But I knew Dad. And for years, that had been enough. Dad started the company when he was 32. He had one pickup truck, a used trailer, and 2 employees. By the time I was born, he had 12 workers. By the time Sarah joined him, they were nearly 40. The company specialized in commercial renovations, restaurants, office buildings, small apartment complexes, anything that needed construction work but wasn't large enough for the national companies. Dad was proud of it, but he was even prouder of the people who worked for him. He knew everyone's name. He knew whose wife was pregnant, whose kid was starting college, whose truck needed repairs. He once told me, "A company isn't the building or the equipment. What is it? The people." I remembered that sentence later, because Sarah seemed to forget it. After Dad died, everything happened quickly. He had a heart attack in his office. Sarah was the one who found him. She called the ambulance. She called Mom. Then she called me. By the time I arrived at the hospital, Dad was gone. There was no warning, no final conversation, no goodbye, just a doctor telling us there was nothing more they could do. Dad's funeral was 3 days later. The company remained closed that week, or so I thought. The morning after the funeral, I received a message from one of Dad's employees. His name was David. He had worked for Dad for 17 years. The message said, "Can you come to the office? Alone." I replied, "Why?" He didn't answer. Instead, 20 minutes later, he sent another message. "Please, before Sarah gets there." That was the first time I became suspicious. I drove to the company. The parking lot was nearly empty. David was standing outside. He looked nervous. "What's going on?" He glanced toward the building. "Sarah came in early." "What is she doing?" "I don't know." "You've worked here for 17 years. Surely you know." "He lowered here for 17 years. Surely you know." He lowered his voice. "She fired 3 people." I stared at him. "What? This morning? Who?" "Mike from purchasing, Karen from accounting, and Luis." "Why? Why?" She said restructuring. I couldn't believe it. Dad's been dead for 4 days. I know. "Did she have authority?" David looked at me. "That's what I'm worried about." Before I could ask anything else, Sarah walked out. She saw us. Her face changed. "What are you doing here?" "I came to see Dad's office." "You can't." "Why?" "It's company property. I'm Dad's daughter, and I'm the person running the company now." I looked at David. He looked away. Sarah said, "Emily, you don't need to get involved." "Why not?" "Because you don't understand the business." I felt the same old anger I'd felt my entire life. "Maybe I don't." "Then trust me." "Why should I?" She stared at me. "Because Dad did." Then she walked back inside. That afternoon, I called Dad's lawyer, Thomas Reed, not related to us despite the surname. He had handled Dad's estate for years. Thomas, Sarah says she's running the company. There was silence. Has the will been read? Not yet. Then how can she take control? She may have authority under the company's operating documents. Do you know if she does? I haven't reviewed everything yet. Can you stop her? I need evidence first. What kind? Corporate resolutions, shareholder agreements, board documents, anything showing who has authority. I sighed. Sarah has already changed the locks. Thomas was silent again. Then he said, Emily, don't confront her. Why? Because I don't know what she has. That answer scared me. What do you mean? I'll call you tomorrow. That night David called. Can you meet me? Where? Not the office. Why? Because Sarah is checking everyone's phones. I laughed nervously. That's ridiculous. I'm serious. We met at the coffee shop. David arrived 20 minutes late. He sat across from me. You need to understand something. What? Your father was worried? About Sarah? He nodded. When? Months ago. What did he say? David looked around. He asked me a strange question. What question? If Sarah ever took over the company, would I stay? I stared at him. What did you say? I said yes. What did he say? He said, you going to need to. My stomach tightened. Why would Dad say that? I don't know. You must have some idea. David looked down. There were things happening. What things? Money. I leaned forward. What about money? I can't talk about it yet. Why? Because I promised your father. That sentence made everything worse. What did you promise? David shook his head. Not yet. The next morning, Sarah called me. You've been talking to David. I froze. How do you know? He works for me. Since when? Since Dad died. That didn't answer my question. She sighed. Emily, stop digging. Digging into what? You know what? You know what? You know what? No, I don't. You think Dad left some secret instructions for you. I didn't say anything. She continued. He didn't. How do you know? Because I was there. When? When he made his final decisions. That was strange. Dad's final decisions? I asked. What decisions? She said, about the company. Then she hung up. That evening, Thomas called me. I've reviewed the corporate records. And? Sarah has authority to act as interim president. I felt my heart sink. For how long? Until the ownership issue is resolved. Who owns the company? That's complicated. What does that mean? Your father owned the majority of the shares. Who owns them now? They haven't been transferred yet. So Sarah doesn't own the company. Correct. Then how is she in charge? She was listed as vice president and operations director. I understood. She hadn't stolen the company. She had positioned herself to control it before ownership was settled. That was different, but it still felt wrong. Thomas continued. There is another issue. What? Your father had a private agreement concerning the company's shares. With whom? I don't know yet. Can you find out? Yes. Then do it. 2 days later, David handed me the file. It happened in the parking lot. He waited until Sarah drove away. Then he walked over. She's gone. What? She went to a meeting. He reached into his truck, pulled out a brown folder. He looked nervous. Your father told me to keep this somewhere safe. I stared at it. What is it? I don't know everything inside. Then why are you giving it to me? Because he told me exactly what to do. He turned the file over. Written across the front in black marker were the words, do not open until she leaves. My hands went cold. Why? David looked at me. Because your father knew Sarah would look for it. I took the file home. I didn't open it immediately. I put it on the kitchen table, made coffee, sat down, then stared at it for almost 10 minutes. Finally, I opened it. The first page was a handwritten note from Dad. Emily, if David gave you this, then Sarah has taken control of the company before you understood what was happening. I stopped reading. I called Thomas. He answered immediately. Did you find something? Yes. What? A file Dad left with David. There was silence. What does it say? I don't know yet. Don't alter anything. I won't. Take photographs. I did. Then I continued. Dad's note said, I need you to understand something before you read the documents. Sarah is not a bad person. I almost laughed. That sounded exactly like Dad. Even when he was warning you about someone, he tried to defend them. But Sarah is afraid of losing control. When she is afraid, she makes decisions too quickly. She believes that if she controls the company, she can protect it. She is wrong. I read that sentence 3 times. Then, the company does not belong to the person who controls it. It belongs to the people who built it. My eyes filled with tears. That was Dad. He wasn't just talking about money. He was talking about everyone. The next page was a corporate agreement. I didn't understand half of it. I sent photographs to Thomas. He called 15 minutes later. Emily, where did you get this? Dad left it with David. Do you know what this is? No. It is a shareholder agreement. What does it say? It says your father placed restrictions on the transfer of his shares. To whom? That's the interesting part. What? The shares were not automatically transferred to Sarah. Then who gets them? Thomas paused. An employee trust. I didn't understand. What? Your father created an employee ownership structure. Why? So that the company could not be sold or controlled by one family member. I stared at the page. Sarah doesn't know? Apparently not. I turned to the next page. There was a list. 38 names. Every employee who had worked for Dad for more than 5 years. At the bottom was a percentage. I called Thomas. What is this? That's the ownership allocation. You mean the employees own part of the company? Not part. How much? He hesitated. 60%. I nearly dropped the phone. 60? Yes. And Sarah? Her existing shares are separate. How many? 20%. How many? 20%. And the remaining 20. Thomas was quiet. I knew the answer before he said it. Emily. I stared at the page. Me? Yes. I couldn't breathe. Dad had divided the company 3 ways. Employees. Sarah. Me. But that wasn't all. There was another document, a letter addressed to Sarah. I didn't open it. I called Thomas. Should I read it? Yes. Are you sure? Yes. Are you sure? Yes. I opened it. Dad had written, Sarah, if you're reading this, you believe you are protecting the company. You aren't. You are protecting yourself from the possibility that someone else might make a decision you don't agree with. I swallowed. Then, I know you think Emily doesn't understand the company. You're right. That shocked me. But the next sentence changed everything. She doesn't understand construction. She understands people. That is why I want her involved. I kept reading. You are good at running operations. Emily is good at seeing when people are being ignored. The company needs both. I sat at the kitchen table for almost an hour. Dad had designed the ownership structure so Sarah couldn't control everything, but he had also made sure she couldn't be removed. She would have to work with me. And the employees would have to work with me, and the employees would have a majority. It was brilliant. It was also exactly the kind of thing Sarah would hate. I understood now why Dad had warned David. He knew Sarah would try to take control. He knew she wouldn't wait for the legal process, and he knew the employees would be afraid to challenge her. That's why he had created the file. He needed someone to have proof. The next morning, Sarah called a company meeting. Everyone was required to attend. I wasn't invited. David texted me. She's announcing something. I replied, what? He said, she wants to sell the company. I called Thomas. Can she? No. Why? Because she doesn't own enough shares. Then why is she trying? Because she may have received an offer. From whom? We're finding out. An hour later, David sent me a photograph, a document on the conference table. At the top was the name of a large construction corporation. They had offered to buy Reed & Sons. The amount was enormous, but there was a problem. Sarah had already signed a letter of intent. Without permission from the other shareholders, Thomas told me to come to the office. When I arrived, Sarah was waiting. She looked furious. You've been talking to Thomas? Yes. You have no right, neither do you. She stepped closer. You don't understand what you're doing. I understand that you signed a sale agreement. It's not final. Then why did you sign it? Because it's the best deal Dad could have gotten. Dad isn't here. Exactly. She pointed toward the office. I'm trying to save what he built. No. What? You're trying to control what he built. Her face changed. You think you're better than me now? No. You've never worked one day in this company. I know. You don't understand contracts. I know. You don't understand payroll. I know. You don't understand construction. I know. She stared at me. Then what do you think you can contribute? I took Dad's file out of my bag. This. Her face went white. She recognized the handwriting. What is that? Dad's. Where did you get it? David. David. She turned toward him. He looked terrified. You promised me you wouldn't talk to her. David said, I promised your father. Sarah looked at me. What did Dad write? I opened the first page. Do you want to know? She didn't answer. I read, Sarah is not a bad person, but Sarah is afraid of losing control. Her face hardened. Give me that. No, it's private. Dad left it for me. He didn't leave anything to you. I looked at her. He did. Then I placed the shareholder agreement on the table. Her eyes moved across the page. She read the first paragraph, then the second, then the ownership percentages. Her hands began shaking. No. Yes. This isn't real. It is. You forged this. Thomas stepped forward. I verified the document. Sarah looked at him. You knew. No. She turned back to me. Why didn't Dad tell me? I said, I think he wanted to. She started crying. Then why didn't he? Because he was afraid you'd fight him. She whispered. I wasn't. I looked at her. Wouldn't you? She didn't answer. The company meeting was held that afternoon. All 38 employees were there. Thomas explained the ownership structure. Sarah sat at the front. I sat beside her. For the first time in my life, we were sitting on the same side of a table. Thomas said, under your father's agreement, 60% of the company belongs to the employee trust. Several people looked shocked. David looked at me. Sarah stared at the floor. Thomas continued, 20% belongs to Sarah, and 20% belongs to Emily. Someone asked, what does that mean? It means no single person can sell the company. Another employee asked, then what happens now? Thomas looked at Sarah. Now you have to decide whether you want to follow your father's plan. Sarah looked at me. What would you do? I said, keep it. She frowned. Why? Because Dad didn't spend 40 years building this so he could sell it 4 days after his funeral. She looked at the employees, then at the company sign outside. Finally, she said, okay, that should have been the end. It wasn't, because the file contained one more document, a financial report. Dad had discovered that someone had been stealing money from the company, not thousands, millions, over several years. The money had been hidden through inflated invoices, fake subcontractors, duplicate payments. The report listed several transactions, and one name appeared repeatedly. Not Sarah, not me. Someone else, the company's former financial controller, a man named Richard. He had left 6 months earlier, but there was evidence that someone inside the company had helped him. I looked at Sarah. She looked at me. Did you know about this? No. Did Dad? Yes. No. Did Dad? Yes. Why didn't he report it? Sarah asked. Thomas answered, because your father was investigating. The room went silent. Then David spoke. Your father asked me to watch the accounts. I looked at him. You knew? I knew something was wrong. Why didn't you tell me? Because your father told me not to. Sarah shook her head. Dad knew about this? Yes. And he still kept running the company? He was trying to identify everyone involved. The investigation took months. Richard was eventually charged. 2 other people were involved. But there was another surprise. Sarah's name appeared on one internal authorization. She had approved a payment. I saw it and immediately felt sick. Sarah. She looked at the document. I don't remember this. Your signature is there. I know. Did you approve the payment? I signed dozens of these. Thomas examined it. Then he said, it's not her signature. Sarah stared at him. What? It's a copy. Someone copied my signature? Yes. The room went quiet. The person who had done it was eventually identified. It was the company's former controller. He had used Sarah's digital signature to make unauthorized payments. That explained why Sarah had been so defensive. She hadn't been stealing. She had been manipulated. Sarah broke down that night. We sat in Dad's office, the same office where I had watched her change the locks. She looked at the desk. I thought I was protecting everything. I know. I thought if I didn't take control, someone would destroy it. I know. I became exactly what Dad warned me about. I smiled sadly. He knew you were scared. She started crying. I wish he had just told me. I looked around the office. He tried. She looked at me. What do you mean? I pointed to the file. He left this. She shook her head. That isn't the same. No. Why did he trust you with it? I thought about that. Then I said, maybe because he knew I wouldn't use it to control you. She looked at me for a long time. Then she nodded. That sounds like Dad. The company survived. More than that, it grew. The employee ownership structure turned out to be one of the best decisions Dad had ever made. People worked harder. They stayed longer. They cared about the company's reputation. There was no single owner who could sell it overnight. Sarah remained president. I became chair of the employee trust. At first, I knew nothing about construction. But I learned. Slowly, I learned contracts. I learned budgets. I learned projects were managed. Sarah taught me. I taught her something too. How to listen. We became better at working together. Not because we stopped disagreeing. Because we stopped disagreement as betrayal. 1 year after Dad died, we held a memorial at the company. Every employee attended. David spoke. He told the story of Dad's first truck, how it broke down on the side of the road, how Dad fixed it with borrowed tools, how he worked 18-hour days, how he never missed an employee's child's graduation. Then Sarah spoke. She stood beside the old company sign. She looked at me. Then she said, "My father taught me how to build a business." She paused. "But my sister taught me that a business is still made of people." I smiled. Then she continued, "Dad knew I would try to control everything." Everyone laughed. She laughed too. He was right. Then she looked at me, and he knew Emily would be afraid to speak up. I nodded. He was right about that too. Everyone laughed again. Then Sarah said, "So he built a system that forced us to need each other." That was exactly what he had done. A few weeks later, I found another note. It was tucked inside the original file. I almost missed it. It was only one paragraph. Dad had written, "Emily, if you're reading this, remember that Sarah is your sister before she is your competitor. Sarah, if you're reading this, remember that Emily is your sister before she is your successor. And both of you should remember that the people who work here are not your employees first. They are the reason this company exists." That was Dad, always bringing everything back to the people. Sometimes I think about the morning Sarah changed the locks. She thought she was protecting Dad's company. She thought control meant safety. She thought being the person with the keys meant being the person with the authority. She was wrong. The keys didn't belong to her. The company didn't belong to me. It didn't even really belong to Dad anymore. It belonged to everyone who had spent years building it, and Dad knew that. That's why he left the majority ownership to the employees. That's why he left me 20%. That's why he left Sarah 20%. He wasn't dividing the company. He was protecting it. The brown file is still in my desk. I keep it locked. Not because I'm afraid someone will steal it, because it's the last thing Dad gave me. Sometimes I open it. I read the first page. Sarah is not a bad person. Then the next line. But Sarah is afraid of losing control. I used to think Dad wrote those words because he didn't trust Sarah. Now I understand. He wrote them because he did. He trusted her enough to tell the truth about her, and he trusted me enough to do something with that truth other than use it against her. That's a different kind of trust. A harder kind. Sarah and I still argue. She still thinks I'm too cautious. I still think she's too aggressive. She still wants decisions made quickly. I still ask too many questions. But now, before either of us makes a major decision, we ask, what would Dad think? Not because we want to guess what he would choose, because we remember how he worked. He would ask who benefits, who gets hurt, what happens to the employees, what happens in 5 years, and whether we're making the decision because it's right. Or because we're afraid. The company still has Dad's name, Reed & Sons. Even though there are still no sons. We kept it because changing it felt wrong, but we added something underneath. A small line, built by Michael Reed, continued by everyone. Every time I see it, I think about that file. The file Dad hid because he knew his daughter would try to take control. The file an employee protected because he believed Dad's word. The file that revealed the company wasn't Sarah's, wasn't mine, wasn't even Dad's anymore. It belonged to the people who had built it together. And in the end, that's what Dad wanted us to understand. If Dad had never died, I might never have known any of this. I might have continued believing Sarah understood him better than I did. I might have continued thinking I had nothing to offer the company. I might have stayed outside that building, and Sarah might have sold everything, not because she was evil, because she was scared. Dad saw that. He knew his daughter, so he planned for her fear. He built protections around the company. He gave the employees a voice. He gave Sarah responsibility. He gave me a seat at the table. And he left David a file. One file. With one instruction. Do not open until she leaves. At first I thought that meant Dad didn't trust Sarah. Now I realize it meant something completely different. Dad trusted Sarah enough to know she'd be afraid. He trusted David enough to wait. And he trusted me enough to finish what he started. The last time I spoke to Dad before he died, he said, "Come by Saturday." I never got that Saturday. For a long time, I was angry about it. I wished he'd had one more day, one more conversation, one more chance to tell me everything. But eventually I realized he had. He had left the conversation behind. It was in the file, in the documents, in the employee trust, in the company, in Sarah, and in me. He had spent his entire life teaching us without realizing we were learning. And when he couldn't finish the lesson himself, he left instructions. Sarah once asked me, "Do you think Dad knew we'd end up working together?" I laughed. He probably hoped. Did he know I'd try to take over? Yes. She laughed. That's insulting. It's accurate. She shook her head. Then she asked, Do you think he knew I'd fail? I looked at her. No. What do you mean? I think he knew you'd make a mistake. She nodded. And he knew you'd learn. That made her smile. That's very Dad. Today, I walk into the company through the same front door Sarah changed the locks on. The locks are still there. We never replaced them. There's something fitting about that, because those locks remind me how quickly fear can make someone believe they need to control everything. Sarah still has a key. I have a key. David has a key. Several employees have keys. Nobody has all the keys. That was Dad's point. No one person should. And the brown file, it's still marked, do not open until she leaves. We never removed the words. Sarah wanted to once. I told her not to. Why? Because it's part of the story. She smiled. Fine. Then she added, maybe someday we'll have to write another instruction. What? She laughed. Do not open until Emily F. Lee stops asking questions. I laughed. That's never happening. Exactly. Dad's company didn't survive because one person took control. It survived because nobody did. Sarah learned that leadership isn't ownership. I learned that not understanding something doesn't mean I don't belong in the room. David learned that keeping a promise can change an entire company, and the employees learned that Dad meant what he said all those years ago. A company isn't the building, it isn't the equipment, it isn't the contracts, it isn't the bank account, it's the people. Dad knew that before any of us did, and that's why the last thing he left behind wasn't money. It wasn't property, it wasn't even the company. It was a system designed to make sure his daughters had no choice but to learn how to trust each other. The morning Sarah changed the locks, she thought she was taking control. 4 days later, I thought I'd lost my father's company. Months later, I realized neither of us had ever owned it. We were just caretakers. And Dad had left one employee a brown file to make sure we remembered.